We gotta talk about Taylor Swift.
We declare Charlie Puth should be a bigger artist.
And I'm not even one of those girls who's always like, we gotta talk about Taylor Swift. Honestly, most of her eras are pretty boring. I made one video about Taylor Swift last year where I ranked her discography only because I promised a fan on Twitter that I would do it once she hit 10 studio albums. And I kind of expected to bury the Taylor content for a while. But Jesus Christ, did Taylor have other plans? And we just gotta talk about this album. I'm going off script in this video, and I never do that. I already have the script for my next video, a video about Beyonce, written and ready, and I still want to make that, but fuck, we have to talk about Taylor. So it's late, obviously. I just dropped my full review of the album, just the regular Tortured Poets department, not the anthology, because there are only so many hours in the day to listen to Taylor Swift. If you want my thoughts on the album, on most of the songs on the album, and why I'm not particularly fond of it, you can read my entire review of the project. I'll link it in the description, but for the most part, I'm going to be querying from a lot of the same talking points that I expressed in that review. And let's just start by saying, why does anyone right now need to be talking about Taylor Swift any more than they already are? Because she is obviously already the biggest and most overexposed artist on planet Earth. But I kind of think that's what makes the failure of this record so fascinating. So yeah, basically the minute that Taylor Swift's new album, the Tortured Poets Department, dropped, all of the major publications you would think that, have any chance to actually one day work with Swift and her team, or already have, basically everyone who has a financial incentive to praise her material came out in absurd, glowing, radiant positivity for the record, which they probably all received early anyway. And it kind of seemed like another Taylor era, but in the days following, Jesus Christ. Review after review after review of this record dropped from far more honest critics, and they just lit into this thing. Basically, all of music Twitter spent an entire weekend tearing apart exactly all of the different unique ways that this record fails spectacularly. And to be honest, it's easy to look at this perspective, this heat, this backlash in the moment and think that this may be Taylor's flop era, even though this album is going to sell a genuinely insane amount of copies in its first week alone. It's obviously, of course, because she's pushing it harder than any record in history has ever been pushed, with all of the different copies of this thing, with the radio stations, the iHeart Taylor and SiriusXM collabs. It's clear how badly she wants to break Adele's record. It is so transparently desperate, and she's still not gonna do it. Now, I'm certainly not here to go on a Taylor hate fest. I've made it pretty clear in the past that there's material from her, especially folklore, that I like quite a bit, and in my review of the album, I gave credit to the handful of songs in its track list that I do genuinely think are pretty good.
He had a halo of the highest grade. He just hadn't met me yet.
And if you're already a Swiftie, I probably know what you're thinking. Taylor already has a flop era. Reputation. First of all, I've garnered a bit of a reputation for being a reputation defender, and compared to some of her contemporaries' flop eras, I think she took it in stride pretty well. But believe me, sure, there was backlash for Reputation immediately, especially following its controversial singles. I know, I was a queer teenager when it came out. I was in the fucking trenches. I remember the Reputation backlash like it was yesterday. And the backlash to this new album is another beast entirely. And that's obviously because Taylor has reached a point of overexposure that is almost outside of our conceptuality in the internet era. Who else has been this big while on Twitter? If you open social media at all over the weekend and your feed has any connection to popular music or culture, you probably saw quite a bit of Taylor bashing. And honestly, with some of the lyrics that she threw out, she kind of deserves it. So let's talk about this fucking record already. Why does everyone hate this thing so much? Why is there so much backlash? Is it still going to sell 2.3 million copies? Yes, but is it the end of Taylor's superstardom? Has her peak commercial achievement potentially led to a level of overexposure that will bite back on her next record? Let's start with the easy stuff, because on this new album, Tortured Poets Department, the most controversial and arguably the most hated producer and songwriter in all of music is back in tow, Jack Antonoff. And though I've done quite a bit of criticizing of Antonoff's writing and production over the past couple of years, I like this 1975 record being funny in a foreign language quite a bit. Despite the Jack Antonoff production, this is him at his worst. A lot of this record sounds like typical Taylor, but without some of the grandiosity, the poise and style and flair that makes some of her best instrumentals really soar. And there's also just weird pockets on this record of this bizarre 80s synthesizer pastiche that stands out so badly from everything else. It comes up a few times and it's almost like Jack Antonoff just had leftover Bleachers material and said, fuck it, we'll throw it on a Taylor record.
I'm so depressed, I act like it's my birthday.
I'm sure that's not what happened, but that's just how out of place a handful of the worst instrumentals on this record really do sound. And as myself and many more, perhaps more articulate critics have pointed out, Taylor Swift has been reusing melodies and refrains for years now. I talked about this in my review of Midnights a year and a half ago, where we were hearing things that you could point to numerous other Taylor Swift songs that are functionally identical, and that is once again far worse on Tortured Poets Department. Take any hook here that is decent, and there are two exhaustively similar Taylor Swift hooks probably on better songs elsewhere in her discography. And with the amount of fucking material this woman has released into the world, it is exhausting. In case you also didn't know, 2 hours after the release of this record, she dropped 15 more songs as the anthology, and while I think they're barely just a little bit better than the original bunch, it is exhausting working through this much Taylor. Just looking at this decade so far between all of the Taylor's versions, Midnights, the Folklore, and Evermore era, Taylor has released more music than almost anyone else, and the level of overexposure that it has all achieved has sparked backlash, and there's been Taylor backlash for years now, but it is in another galaxy right now. And a majority of that backlash, in my opinion, deservedly so, is focused on the biggest and most obvious flaw on Tortured Poets Department. The lyrics are awful. In my review, I compared them to the drums on Saint Anger. That's how obviously bad they are. They're that omnipresent, and I think that if and when this record goes down as the spectacular disaster I believe it is, that the lyrics will be the first thing that so many people point to, and that was the case right out of the gate. The Charlie Puth lyric from the title track was viral before the album even dropped. And that was just one of many, many viral lyrics to make the rounds. The 1830s lyric from the anthology, What Was She Thinking? The awful touchdown lyric on Alchemy. Come on, baby. And again, not to continue to dig into my Taylor backstory, but I have criticized her lyricism extensively in the past. She's kind of always been this corny. But this time, it's different. These songs are conceptualized, poorly. The lyrics are bad, and they're bad in a way that is extremely fucking cringy. And cringe is the name of the game here. People have pointed out, I mean, dozens and dozens of cringe lyrics on the record. Right out of the gate on the opener Fortnite, you get the miracle move on, effects were temporary, drug, which made my eyeballs roll so hard they almost fell out of my head. Many have pointed out that the normal girls are boring sequence in Smallest Man Who Ever Lived might unintentionally be the most cutting diss that anyone has ever made to Taylor Swift, and she made it herself. And basically every lyric on a handful of other tracks here are just total fucking landmines. I Can Do It With a Broken Heart hardly goes 30 seconds without a terrible lyric. They are that ubiquitous in the song. And the album's absolute worst cut, Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, arguably doesn't have any lyrics that aren't terrible. And there is actually one thing I kind of want to touch on in this video, kind of an important point, and part of the inspiration for why I felt that I needed to talk about it in the first place, and that is a defense that a lot of Swifties have been conjuring about the truly awful lyricism on display here. And you will hear a lot of them making the claim that it is on purpose. And there are a handful of points where it is really obvious to point that out. For example, the song Down Bad literally features an attempt to recontextualize her bad lyrics by describing herself as a petulant teenager. And we get really, really similar lyrics on the track But Daddy, I Love Him, where the lyrics make it really obvious that the perspective we're listening from is this sort of very rebellious teenager type, so it's not that surprising that the writing is very edgy. But here's the thing, as someone who is a fucking media critic, I feel like that's only half the battle. Yeah, I know that But It's Bad on Purpose is like one of the classic archetypal bad arguments. You don't need me to tell you how to topple that down in a debate. But seriously, one thing that's worth asking of these two songs is if you're going to acknowledge that the lyrics are bad, which they so obviously are, and try to defend them with the claims that it's bad on purpose, why? Why is it bad on purpose? But here's the thing. I don't fundamentally have any issues with that argument if you can answer a follow-up question as simple as why. On this album, one of the highlights, albeit an extremely cringe titled highlight, is the track I Can Fix Him, No I Really Can, where Taylor is writing from a perspective of toxicity and being wrong. She is almost making fun of herself as the I can fix him kind of girl, knowing that at the end of the song she has a lesson to learn. And while I think she kind of takes a cop-out approach by making that lesson so half-assed in the last minute, if you ask someone why the lyrics on that song were bad, they would have a really obvious explanation, and it's clear that Taylor went into it with a good reason. But nowhere else on this album do the bad lyrics make any sense. If she is going to step into this lens, step into this character, these facsimiles of herself, there has to be a point, a reason, something to learn, something to gain, some measure of introspection. And if there isn't, which there almost never is on this record, you're just listening to bad lyrics. I hate to even bring this up in the video, but take one of the best albums of last year, Jane Remover, Census Designated. I'm not calling the lyrics here bad. In fact, I think they're great. They are often toxic, jumbled, sometimes flat out wrong, as she sings from the perspective of deeply flawed characters. But the thing is, she understands to pay it off. When you listen to a song like Video, there's payoff.
And through the screen, kills me to know the lengths I go. Do you see me in the video?
There's meaning and purpose behind the writing, and that is what Tortured Poets Department lacks throughout its entire runtime. And it's why we can kind of tell so easily that Taylor didn't seek out to use bad lyrics to teach some kind of lesson or have some kind of revelation in her songs and in her stories. She just wrote bad lyrics, and this is the only defense that Swifties have for them. Now, I certainly haven't been seeking out arguments or even discussion with many Swifties in the wake of this album release. Trust me, talk about Taylor Swift online and they will find you. But to me, this explains why I think we arrived where we arrived. And I'm going to speak in some generalities, if you'll allow me that. Taylor Swift has been one of, if not the most universally and unanimously praised artists on Earth for a while now. From the absolute mass of fans who bought 4 different versions of every single album she's released since Lover, to the critics who have often, unfortunately, been extremely reluctant to criticize Taylor at her lowest, she has rarely received much backlash of any kind. And those who do hate on her, often spawning from her overexposure, are the quietest voice in the crowd, which is why this complex that Taylor has, this persecution complex that pops up all over her music, is so exhausting. But more importantly, I think the reluctance of people to call out the massive and obvious flaws in records like Midnight's and Lover and a lot of the vault material from all of her different Taylor versions that probably had no business seeing the light of day is why she thinks she can just drop 31 mostly mediocre to outright bad songs and get rewarded for it. And to use a pop community term, I think we might be in for a delayed flop because, let's be honest, Taylor was too big to fail. This album is going to sell literally 2+ million copies in its first week. It's going to challenge for Adele's record, even though it doesn't look like it's going to get it. And it's a massive favorite to win Album of the Year at the Grammys, which could be another all-time Grammys disaster in the wake of Cowboy Carter. But this album is going to succeed in spite of backlash, massive backlash, the likes of which most artists will never be anywhere close to popular enough to receive. There are definitely albums that have failed harder than this. Chance the Rapper's The Big Day being one that just comes to mind when I think about this record. But I'm not sure there's been anything that's failed as big as this, and the stands will flex the commercial triumph of this record, and they will flex any awards that Taylor Swift wins because of it. But in my opinion, if Taylor wants to be both acclaimed and have a stable place in the A-list, the more popular this record is, the more of a disaster it is. Of course, I'm just some bitch on the internet who likes to think critically about pop music too much. Taylor Swift will be fine, and she will always be famous, but if I were a Swiftie, I would revel in her A-list status at the top of the top right now, because after Tortured Poets Department, she might have to win a lot of people back around. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of the unscripted video. I don't think I'll do them very often. I much prefer working with the script. I'm a writer. I like to flex what I'm capable of, and this doesn't really allow me to do that in the same way, but it just felt like I hadn't put anything out in a while, and everyone and their goddamn mother is talking about this album right now. I just wanted to share some thoughts about it. I wanted to talk about some of the whack-ass defenses that Swifties are throwing up for this thing, and I just wanted to put something out before the April update drops in like a week or so. Thanks for watching. Thanks for reading my review if you get around to it. And please share some thoughts about this album in the comments. There is a lot more that I have to say about it. This could be an hour-long video if I wanted it to. And I'm sure somewhere in here I said something that will upset someone or that someone will try and disprove. And you know what? That's great. We'll talk about it in the comments. We'll have a Taylor party. And I'll see you guys next time. Kisses. Mwah.